Hello everybody and welcome back to Tin Man Collections. Today I'll be reading a chapter out of the Ghost of the Southern Mountains and Appalachia book by Nancy Roberts. And this chapter is Fort Mountain. And it's in Fort Mountain, Georgia. If anybody's been there, you'll know where that's at. But anyway, I already skimmed through to see how many pages, and it looks like we got 12 pages. So we might have to do a two-part, but I'm just going to stop talking and let's get on with the story, shall we? Frank Willer decided that if he continued to go over in his mind the reasons the stock market had fallen, he still wouldn't know any more than any other broker. He just wanted to get away from Atlanta, to go where it would be peaceful and beautiful, and that meant the mountains of North Georgia. If I need to go escape from stress or a stressful job, I'm going to the mountains. That's me. Anyway, he and Meg and their 7-year-old daughter, Sarah, would stay in a cabin tonight rather than outdoors. Because it was Friday and it took time to set up camp, but tomorrow night they would sleep under the stars on Fort Mountain. Dad, why are you taking that equipment? I never ever seen you use it before. You have it, pumpkin. I thought it said pumpkin, I'm sorry. But anyway, but I think it may come in handy. He was constantly surprised by how observant Sarah was. He had found some gear that he had used during his college years, and he wanted to recapture the freedom from worry he had known more than a decade ago, before the world grew so complicated. Not only had he lost much of his clients' money, but some of his own as well, for he believed in what he recommended and usually bought the same stocks for himself. North Georgia was one of his favorite places, and he was looking forward to getting there. Although the place they were staying tonight was a small cabin over a century old and very primitive. It was near Chatsworth. Use it whenever you and your family want to get away, a friend had generously told him. He was lucky that Meg and young Sarah were both good campers and seemed to enjoy it as much as he did. They reached the cabin about 9 o'clock that night and were ready for bed. When they went in, he led the way with his flashlight, and then it went out. "Don't worry, Dad, I got mine," said Sarah, and she handed it to him so Meg could light a candle. Yeah, I hate it when you shine a flashlight and the darn thing goes out and you're like, oh, you should have checked the batteries. In a little while, they had 2 kerosene lamps burning, and Frank could see the log walls and the old fireplace with smoky stones across the top. What a musty odor that place had, he thought, and he doubted anyone had lived there in years. There was no running water, just a pump on the back porch, and he really didn't want the chance drinking from it. They washed their faces out at the pump, and he and Sarah refreshed themselves with spring water from one of the jugs. Yeah, spring water tasted pretty good to me. I like the spring water they buy in the store. It tastes pretty much like drinking water. But anyway, they were in bed in less than 30 minutes when he was awakened by Sarah's voice coming from off in the distance saying, "Daddy, I can't sleep." "You'll be asleep in a few minutes, honey," he replied. A minute or so passed, and he had just dozed off when the child's voice spoke up again. "Daddy, it's hard to sleep with all that music going on." "Music? I don't hear a thing." "Meg, do you hear any music?" "No, I don't." "What does it sound like, honey?" "Well, it's banjos and fiddles, playing as it's out there in the front room." "Sarah, you're just imagining that." "No, Daddy, I heard some of those songs at school, but these are prettier." "Well, you just have to enjoy them alone then, because Mom and Dad are tired and we're going to sleep." Next morning, everyone slept late because the large tree shaded the cabin from the morning sunlight. They didn't try to cook, but ate breakfast at a fast food place in Chatsworth. "Daddy, when people die, can they come back and play the music they used to play?" No, when they die, they don't come back and play any music. That is a scary question to ask right there, but spooky too. Uh, then where did the music come from that I listened to last night? Sarah, I don't want to hear any more about that music. Sometimes you take teasing too far. All right, Dad, but her mother frowned at her and Sarah stopped. She looked out the window then and she was very quiet. As they drove up the mountain, they could see the tall tulip poplars with their golden leaves fluttering in the breeze. Gray trunks straight and tall, and the woods on each side of the road were an artist's palette of colors in the lemon light of Indian summer. The dogwoods shook what crimson leaves. That sounds like a beautiful setting, but anyway. They had left in a last act of defiance. A squirrel holding a hickory nut stood motionless, staring out at the road from the edge of the woods. This was when the seasons turned, and as they did, there was always this pause, this magical suspension of time that made Frank feel that he and everything around him would go on forward just as it was at that moment. Dad, is it all right if I don't go with you or Mother? Why is that? I thought I'd go looking for those little things called British soldiers that grow on logs or maybe mushrooms. That's fine, but just don't eat any and don't get lost. Dad, we never have gotten lost. That sounds like a smart remark, but anyway. Sarah looked in denial. You have it, but take your compass anyway. And it was true. She had a good sense of direction, and after the first few trips, they hadn't worried about her at all. She was a pretty remarkable little girl, he thought proudly. And here's a picture of, I don't know if you see it, but the Fort Mountain State Park plaque. So if you guys go to Fort Mountain, that's what you look for. Anyway, as a boy in his teens, Frank loved to come here. It was a special place to get away from parents and other perplexities. Like everyone who sees the wall of stones at the front of the mountain, he often wondered about the people who built it. Moon-eyed people with blonde hair, the Cherokee legends called them long before Columbus was born. A band of people of Welsh heritage had landed in Mobile Bay and somehow made their way to North Georgia. The Cherokees had called them the Moon-eyed people. Okay, that's a weird name, but I'll take it. But anyway, because it was believed that they were worshipped the moon. They were also credited with seeing better at night than animals. The last gold shreds of the dress a tulip poplar had worn since spring drifted down, coming to rest on the wall where Frank sat, and for the first time he thought about the size of the stones and their weight. Many of them were far heavier than he could pick up alone, and several people would be needed to move them. He visualized the hands that had lifted these stones and wondered about the people who had placed them here so long ago. Actually, a barrier of loosely piled stones, the wall extended almost 1,000 feet around one side of the mountain from east to west. 1,000 feet? Good Lord Almighty. Well, if you're in the mountain, it's got to be a big wall. Anyway, it was 3 to 7 feet high, and at intervals along it were round, shallow pits encircled by rocks that may have been used as a sentry post or watchfire pits. The legend of the Welsh who came over to this continent in 1170. Good Lord, that's a long time ago. Way long time ago. Under the leadership of Prince Modoc. Sounds like a character name from Marvel, but anyway. And much credibility. They must have thought the Alabama area would be more desirable than Wales. For according to the story, part of their group went back to bring more settlers, leaving only 200 behind. Whether by Indian attacks or disease, they dwindled until only a few were left, and in an effort to protect themselves, they migrated from Alabama up into Georgia until they reached Fort Mountain. Prince Modoc, who had remained behind with his people, ordered them to build a fort which would afford more permanent protection. For weeks, they must have patiently carried the stones until finally their European-style line of defense, unlike the wooden stockades of the later English settlers, was completed on the flank of the mountain. Now, they were protected, for the outpost of fire pits illuminated the night, and any invaders were silhouetted against the sky. Moccasined feet or bare feet would become bloody feet in crossing the barrier of sharp stones which lay in front of the wall. They know how to protect themselves. Imagine a rock going through your... Oh, a lot of blood. But anyway. And the movement of the rocks underfoot ruled out any out and attack by stealth. After lighting the fires, the Welsh could fall back among the trees and pick off their attackers as they crossed the rocks in the light from the flames. How long they were able to survive among the Indians is not known, but stories about them and their blued eyes and golden hair continue to echo down through the centuries. Frank thought about how much we rely upon the books for getting those mysterious, mist-covered eons before they were written records, when the only history of the people's past came down to each successive generation. Through the memorized stories of the elders of a tribe, they alone transmitted stories of the great wind, probably a hurricane, a devastating volcanic eruption, the disappearance of an island and its people into the ocean, a great victory in battle, and the deeds of heroic men and women. Then he thought about another explanation for the wall, the story that De Soto and his men had built it as they hunted for gold on their journey through the southeast. De Soto was here in 1540, but according to what Frank had read about the period, the Spaniards' diaries indicated that they seemed to have been in the area near Fort Mountain only about 2 weeks. I'm going to read a little bit of this paragraph. I'm going to stop the camera and do part 2. Okay? Just thought I'd let you know. Building walls was not the sort of work Spaniards liked, and although De Soto would probably have used enforced Indian labor, he was an impatient man, and gold was his real objective. He's got that early gold fever, I tell you. Anyway, this meant constant travel, and a stone wall of defense would not have served any real purpose for him. When he interrogated the Indians about the gold, they often pointed toward the high mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina. Wish I could find gold in my home state, but anyway. In an attempt to hurry the Spaniards on their way. Just after sunset, Meg and Sarah returned from their explorations, and water was heated for coffee. Meg had packed sandwiches and made a cake. Sarah found a flat, sheltered place to put her sleeping bag and lay down soon after dark. When Meg and Frank checked on her, the child's blonde head rested against the large brown teddy bear she always cuddled at home, and her breathing was soft and even. She was almost 7 and very mature in some ways, but in others perhaps too imaginative, thought Frank. He hoped she would grow out of this fantasizing. At least tonight he would have a good night's sleep. Probably not, but anyway. He was emotionally exhausted by the week he had been through, and tomorrow he would enjoy sharing his knowledge of the history of the wall with Sarah and Meg. It was almost midnight when Sarah awaked to the rhythmic tones of distant drums. Probably like that, but anyway. They aren't like the drums I've heard in a parade. She thought they're almost like notes of music, but somehow the sound seems old and covered up with moss. The drums grew louder. All right, I'm going to stop the camera and go to part 2, so hold on.